All right. Abanawa, Shaba Shamayam, Kwadash Haya, Shamka, Yahweh, Malakwatka, Taba'a, Ratazawanka, Haya, Isha, Ba'arataza, Kawa, Haya, Bashamayam, Natan Lanawa, Lacham, Ka Yawam, Wa Salak Nawa, Kabawaf Nawa, Kasalak Nawa, Kabawawath Yanawa, Wala'a, Tabaya'a Nawa, Banasaya Wam, Abal, Hawashanawa, Man Rai, Kaya Laka, Ha Malakwath, Waha Allah, Waha Tapa'arath, La Iwalam, Yum, Shalawam. All right, so yeah, back in this first book of Maccabees, like I said, I'm gonna go through about the first 4 chapters. I'm not gonna read the totality of each chapter because they're pretty long, but I'm gonna point out, pull out the key points and hit a couple scriptures here and there. All right, so this is the book of First Maccabees, chapter 1. And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Kittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece. And so this Alexander here is the historical Alexander the Great, right? That's what they call him, right? They consider him. He is the turning point in which Esau started to reign, right? I want to get a scripture real quick, and let's go to Malachi. Go to Malachi. I'm gonna start at verse 1. Let me read down about 4. Yeah, Malachi. Oh, no, the book of Malachi, chapter 1, verse 1. The burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. I have loved you, said the Lord. Yet ye say, wherein hast thou loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother? Said the Lord. Yet I loved Jacob, and I hated Esau, and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. Right, and this next verse is the turning point, right, in which we see we're gonna see the rise of Esau, Edom again. Verse 4. Whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. Right, so we know that the Most High is, when it comes to Esau, he's not dealing with Esau ever, right? But that's what happened. And after our reign, when we reigned under David and Solomon, perfect, for that 80 years, and then the few kings we had afterwards, but we were overtaken, taken into captivity, through the nations, through the heathen. At that time, Esau still hadn't made his, comeback yet, but he was just like he was saying, we gonna come back and rebuild the desolate places, right? Everywhere that they've been, either pushed out of or they've been, it's been brought to naught. All right. Going back to First Maccabees, right? So Alexander is the turning point in history where you see the kingdoms of Esau start to rise. All right, verse 2, and made many wars and won many strongholds and slew the kings of the earth and went through the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up. And he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him. And after these things, he fell sick and perceived that he should die. Now, another key point about Alexander was he was also a homosexual.
Hmm?
He was a homosexual, yes, and I believe he died of syphilis, if I'm not mistaken. But he was a homosexual and he did contract the STD. Verse 6, wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. Right. So he also had 4 generals, which were, like I said, those were, the guys brought up from his youth, his friends. So before he died, he split his kingdom, all the area he conquered, he split that into 4 generals. And those 4 generals were Cassander, and he ruled over the area of Macedonia, Ptolemy, which ruled in Egypt, Lysimachus, he was the ruler over Greece and Asia Minor, the area they consider Asia Minor. And then you had Seleucus, who his kingdom was in Syria. His kingdom was in Syria. All right. Verse 7. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule every one in his place. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been a hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks, right? So this is also before Rome was overtaken by Esau as well. This is when Rome still had some of the original inhabitants over there, the darker olive colored people like the Etruscans and stuff like that. So verse 9 and verse 10 were also prophecies, and these prophecies were in the book of Daniel. So let's go to Daniel 8 and 8. Daniel 8 and 8, because it talks about this prophetically in the book of Daniel. The four generals, as well as the rising of Antiochus Epiphanes. All right. It's the book of Daniel, chapter 8 and verse 8. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, a great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of heaven. Right, so that's making that he-goat right there is Alexander, and those 4 notable ones were those 4 generals, right, towards the 4 winds of heaven. And when you look at the way the land was split between them, you had one that was more east, north, south, and west, because we know Egypt. You had the countries of the east, which were the Macedonian and Greek countries. Then you had Asia Minor and Syria, all those areas. So it kind of covered like a four directional coverage of countries. Verse 9, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great towards the south and towards the east and towards the pleasant land. Right, and now this is making reference to Antiochus Epiphanes, right, who came out from, he branched off from them. He was their people. He branched off from them, and and rose up to be great, right? Which we'll see down in this first chapter, because it said that little horn, he waxed exceeding great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the pleasant land. Keep that in mind. All right, so let's go back to the book of First Maccabees. Pick it up at verse, I'm gonna pick it up at verse 11. All right, in those days went out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So this device pleased them well. Then certain people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen, whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and was sold to do mischief. Right. So from 11 to 15, that's a lot going on there, right? And that's how we know that this is the truth, right? Because right there in verse 14, where it says they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem. What is a place of exercise? A gym, right? A gymnasium, right? You go to the gym to work out, right? And the word gymnos in the Greek, I believe it means to work out naked. So that's why when you go to the gym, you see people what? Like in, little to nothing sometimes, right? Or if you go, you see guys working out outside, they're working out without shirts on and stuff like that, because they used to literally work out in the nude, right? And we see that Israel, we had, just like we have today, they want to join hands with the heathen because they feel like, just like it said, they felt like since the heathen are not around, they're not having fun, right? Or, it's boring because, and look at what they're doing, right? So again, like I said, it says, envy not the oppressor, right? Proverbs 3:31 says, envy thou not the oppressor, right? We shouldn't want to do things according to what they're doing, right? The Most High gave us, our lifestyle. He gave us our heritage, and it's holy. It's holiness, right? Also with verse 11, understanding the book of Maccabees also is very key into understanding the New Testament. Understanding the book of Maccabees is very key in understanding the New Testament, because when you get into the New Testament, people, especially in Christianity, they get really confused when it starts talking about the Jews and the Gentiles, or the Jews and the Greeks, right? They'll start telling you that that's those Greeks there, those are Caucasians, those are Edomites, those Greeks. That's so that's how they can get the kingdom, right? Through, they say, like, through Jesus Christ, that's how they can get the kingdom, because it says no Jew and no Greek. But you have to understand the complete history, right? Which that's why we know that them removing the Apocrypha from the standard Christian church, it had to be done because of this history right here, right? In verse 11, it said, right? In those days there went out with Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow, right? So we look at that, and we can go to we'll go to Galatians chapter 2 and verse 4. I'm gonna go into Galatians chapter 2 and verse 4. Because now we have brothers still doing the same thing, the same type of infiltration, just like, you had wicked men in that time, during the time of the Greeks. So when Paul is on the scene talking, right, now we can start to see who his audience is talking to, who his audience is, right? Galatians chapter 2, verse 4, and it reads, and because that of false brethren unawares brought in, who came in to privily spy out our liberty, which we have in Hamashiach Yahushua, that they might bring us into bondage, right? And so now we know that, like those same wicked brothers, right, that made these leagues. So when it came to the New Testament, and Paul was talking about when he was talking about what he was, his his mission was being towards the Gentiles, he's still talking about those same brothers who were raised according to the Greek customs and stuff like that. You had wicked Israelites who were still coming in to spy out the liberty that we now once have, right? And then against those brothers who were still trying to get them to do carnal sacrifices, right? Also in verse 15, right, it reads, and made themselves uncircumcised and forsook the holy covenant and joined themselves to the heathen and were sold to do mischief, right? So that's the point where you get that the circumcision and the uncircumcision, right? In the same book of Galatians, when you go down to in chapter 2, verse 7, it says, but contrariwise, when they saw that the gospel of the uncircumcision was committed unto me, as the gospel of the circumcision was committed unto Peter. Right now, you know that's not talking about just people who are circumcised versus uncircumcised. It's talking about the people who were outside of the holy covenant and were made uncircumcised through their forsaking of the commandments and their lifestyle in which Yahweh gave them, right? That made them uncircumcised, right? So I just want to throw that little bit of history in there, because it's, again, like I said, it's very key that you know the book of Maccabees in order to it helps you better understand the audience of the New Testament. All right, so now let me get back to Maccabees chapter 1, right? Down to verse 16. Right, now when the kingdom was established before Antiochus, he thought to reign over Egypt, that he might have the dominion of 2 realms, right? Just like I said in Daniel, it said that little horn, he would wax great and towards the south and towards the east and the pleasant land, right? So he started out with Egypt first, right, which is south of where he was at, right? Because he was over there in the kingdom. He was over there in Greece, right, which is towards the east. All right. So it says, now Antiochus thought to reign over Egypt, that he might have dominion over 2 realms. Wherefore he entered into Egypt with a great multitude, with chariots and elephants and horsemen and a great navy, and made war against Ptolemy, king of Egypt. But Ptolemy was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded to death. Right. So now he's waxed great in the south, right? He chased out Ptolemy, who Alexander had set up, right? He chased them out that land just so he can have that land. Right. And then it said he waxed great in the east towards the south and the pleasant land. Right. Verse 20. And after that Antiochus had smitten Egypt, he returned again in the 143rd year and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude, and entered proudly into the sanctuary and took away the golden altar and the candlestick of light and all the vessels thereof, and the table of showbread and the pouring vessels and the vials and the censers of gold and the veil and the crowns and the golden ornaments that were before the temple, all which he pulled off. He took also silver and the gold and the precious vessels. Also, he took the hidden treasures which he found. Right, so that's the pleasant land. That's the prophecy that came out of Daniel, that that little horn, which is Antiochus Epiphanes, right? Because he came in, he took the south, which was Egypt, and then he came in and took the pleasant land, right? He came in our land, and like I said, he basically robbed it, right? He looted the whole thing, right? He looted the whole thing. So we start to see that invasion of our land, just like they've done throughout history, right? We know that there's nothing new under the sun, and they invaded us the same way, even on this land, right? They invaded, and then they set up all their idols and all of their, abominations and things of that nature, just as Antiochus did, right? So let's jump around. Let me go around to let's see. Let's go down to verse 30. All right, verse 30. All right. Says and reads, and spake peaceable words unto them, but all was deceit. For when they had given him credence, he fell upon them, he fell suddenly upon the city and smote it very sore and destroyed much people in Israel. Right. So again, just like they do, they come in speaking what kind words, like there's no problem, but the whole time he's looking to destroy us, right? All right, and that was verse 30, right? And then also we know that it's very key in knowing Maccabees as well, because these people are the same people that set up now, right? Let's jump down to verse 37. No, I'm gonna start at verse 33. Right, I was just start at verse 33. It says, verse 32, rather. But the women and children they took captive and possessed the cattle. Right. So just like they do, they kill the men and they take the women captive, take the children captive. Right. Verse 33. Then builded they the city of David with a great tower and strong wall, and with mighty towers, and made it a stronghold for them. And they put therein a sinful nation, wicked men, and fortified themselves therein. Right. And who's doing that now? Right. They've taken our cities and put other people in there. And it says a sinful nation. Right. So we know that, even how they're set up here on our land on this side, right? This sinful nation is holding all of the pleasant land. They're holding our history, right? They fortified themselves, right? They're protected, right? And this is what they did even back then, right? Verse 35, they started also with armor and with victuals, and when they had gathered together the spoils of Jerusalem, they laid them up there, so they became a sore snare, for it was a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary and an evil adversary to Israel. Right. And also that lets you know too, like the Vatican, how the Vatican is set up as well. The Vatican is set up that same way, they built like big walls and stuff around it. They've done that same thing at the Vatican, and that's where they're storing a lot of our hidden history as well, like all of the items. Yeah, all of the items that they've stolen from us over the years, they're storing it in the Vatican. All right, verse 37. Thus they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary and defiled it, insomuch that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them, whereupon the city was made a habitation of strangers and became strange to those that were born in her, and her own children left her. Her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness, her feast turned into mourning, and her Sabbaths into a reproach, her honor into contempt. So, and that's talking about the land of Israel right there. That's like I said, like her children that are born in her don't even recognize her, because it doesn't look like what it's supposed to look like. Just like when we look at our cities, the cities that they have now, the way they're structured is not structured the way we have them structured, right? So when we're born and we wake up, we look around like, it's not even, it doesn't look like what we're supposed to be, doing. It doesn't look like our life, right? Verse 40. As had been her glory, so was her dishonor increased, and her excellency was turned into mourning. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. Right now, this is back in that time, right? And all praises to the Most High. Chief Harsha was just speaking about that in her video about that one world order, and they've been trying to do it since back then, since the time of the Greeks, right? Antiochus said what? He wrote to all the kingdoms that they should all be one people, right? And everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and sacrifice unto idols and profane the Sabbath. For the king has sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the cities of Judah that they should follow the strange laws of the land. Right. So, this king wanted everybody, no matter where you was, what nation you was from, to leave whatever customs and culture you was doing, right? And join the king's religion, right? The king's religion, right? Which that still happened today, right? When Christianity, people weren't just accepting, some people accepted Christianity, but our people weren't accepting Christianity, or they were put to death, right? You either accepted or you were put to death. And then but you do have some people that willingly join, right? Because our people are like that, right? We don't want to obey the Most High, so we just, we join whatever makes us feel comfortable or gives us some sense of being, right? Verse 45, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, that they should profane the Sabbaths and the festival days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts. Right. And this is the whole reason that he's writing this letter to get everybody to do this is right here in verse 48. That they should also leave their children. I mean, it's in verse 49. But verse 48, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end that they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. Right. So that was the whole reason this king wrote out that, hey, let's just everybody do this. And for you Israelites, hey, y'all stop doing the circumcisions, stop doing the Sabbath, stop keeping those holy days, right? No, here you can have Christmas, you can have Valentine's Day, you can have Mother's Day, you can have St. Patrick's Day, you can have Halloween. We'll give you all these other things, right? Right. And then that's what happened over time. If you continue to practice these things, what they're gonna forget, right? But the Most High told us that we were supposed to, pass his laws down to our children, right? Let's get Psalms real quick. Psalms. Let's get Psalm 78. Psalm 78. Psalm 78, verse 5. Psalm 78, verse 5. Because that was the whole reason that this Edomite king wanted us to stop doing all of our customs. And so that the generations would forget the law, right? And if they forget the law, they forget the Most High, right? Because the law came from the Most High, right? Psalms chapter 78 and verse 5. For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that they might set their hope in Yahweh and forget not the works of Yahweh and keep his commandments. Right. So that's what that's what the Most High told us to do, right? Just as this wicked king was setting himself up, and you had those Israelites who did what? Made a league with these people, right? And that's what they did. They stopped keeping the customs, right? And not all of them, not all Israelites, but a vast majority of them stopped keeping customs, right? So they'd forget the law, so that the generations to come wouldn't even know the law. They wouldn't even know the Most High, but they know their Greek fashion, right? Just like today, in college, when you go to college, you can join what? A Greek fraternity. You can join a Greek fraternity, right? So this is the same people doing the same things, offering the same things as during the time of Antiochus, right? Let's go back. I'm going back to Maccabees. Pick it up at verse 50. Right, and it reads, and whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. right? So if you weren't going to if you're going to keep the Sabbath, you're going to be put to death, right? If you were still doing Passover sacrifices, you were going to be put to death. The moment they find out, right? Verse 52. Then many of the people were gathered unto them, to wit, everyone that forsook the law, and so they committed evils in the land, and drove the Israelites into secret places, even wheresoever they could flee for succor. Right, and we know that word succor is talking about help, assistance in the time of help. That's what that's succor. So, and this is being done by our people. This is being done by our people. So, and we still see that today, right? We still see our people trying to, run us off and what, and silence us as well, right? Try to drive us out of places, right? When you see brothers that's on the corners bringing out the word, they try to drive them off the corners, make up little laws and little rules where they can't stand on the corners and speak the word, can't speak truth, right? Or when you are on YouTube, you can't say certain things, or they're gonna take down your page, or they'll silence the post, or it's got to meet community guidelines, right? Or just all different types of ways to silence us. Verse 54. Now the 15th day of the month Kasla, in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar, and builded idol altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side, and burnt incense at the doors of their houses and in the streets. And when they had rent in pieces the books of the law, which they found, they burnt them with fire. So, and that's the same thing. They're gonna do that again. It's gonna be illegal at some point to have a Bible. What? It's going to be illegal at some point to own a Bible, because we're speaking truth from the Bible, right? And that's how the message is getting out. That's how the spirit is being placed back on the earth, and that's through the Bible, which contains the laws of the Most High, right? But you see, once the heathen got hold to them, they burnt it, right? They burnt it with fire. You know what I'm saying? So, that's why in this time they didn't, they could have been did away with all the Bibles. They could have been did away with them. But so instead of burning them, right, all they did was change your understanding. They tweaked the understanding of the Bible, so people will, you know what I'm saying, believe in Jesus, or people are just disassociate themselves with the Bible altogether. Right. Let's jump down. So no, we're just gonna keep reading down. Verse 57, and wheresoever was found with any the book of the testament, or if any consented to the law, the king's commandment was that they should put him to death. So that's in this time, man. It's gonna be a time you get even caught with a Bible. You get caught with a Bible, you're gonna get in trouble. You know what I'm saying? You get caught with any part of the Bible, at some point you're gonna get in trouble, and that's gonna come again because these people are the same people that's in rulership right now, right? Verse 58. Thus they did by their authority unto the Israelites every month, to as many as were found in the cities. Now in the 25th day of the month, they did sacrifice upon the altar, which was upon the altar of Yahweh. Right. So on the 25th day of the 9th month, right, they sacrificed upon an idol altar on the same day, right? When we come into the first day of the Feast of Dedication, that same day, they sacrificed their unclean animals and all of that upon the altar of Yahweh, right? That was, that was still there, right? And they knew it was the altar of Yahweh, and they set up an altar and they sacrificed unclean food on it, right? Just the disrespect, the disregard, right? And that's why the Most High has indignation with Esau forever. But because he's just so defiant. He's been defiant since he was born, right? And his seed are just defiant, right? They just want to do any and everything to defy the Most High. right? Verse 60, at which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women that caused their children to be circumcised, and they hanged the infants about the necks and rifled their houses and slew them that had circumcised them. Right. So they killed the women. You see what they did to the babies, right? And then they even the people who did the circumcising got killed. They put them to death too, right? Which we know that it's gonna be a time for recompense upon our enemies, because we know that that's just evil. That's just plain evil, right? And like Chief and I spoke earlier, brothers that are out there kind of doing that same thing, and we do understand that captivity is coming for the heathen. We do understand that the Most High is gonna turn their own devices against them, and they're gonna go into a worse punishment. But you know what I'm saying? We can't even fathom the punishment that they're gonna get. And to think it's gonna be like the punishment we got, it's gonna be far worse. So brothers do have to be careful in what they sit there and say, speaking truth, because they have to speak truth, right? Because we see all the evils they've done to us, right? Verse 62. Howbeit many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves not to eat any unclean thing. Wherefore they chose rather to die, that they might not be defiled with meats, and that they might not profane the holy covenant. So then they died, and there was a great wrath upon Israel. Right. So, like I said, those Israelites who joined and made leagues with these people, you pray in this time that they're able to repent. But most of the same people are the same people now who's in their systems doing the things that, you know what I'm saying, according to the customs of the heathen, right? And they want to do those things. These people, the Bible says there's no end of all the people. So we know that generation in and generation out, even though people die, these same spirits are regenerated, and these same spirits are still here. Right. So that's just a little bit of history as far as Antiochus and the one world order that they've been doing since that time, right? And the reason they did it. And then so moving into chapter 2, right? This charge was led by Mattathias, which was the son of well, he was a priest. It says the sons of Joarib from Jerusalem, and he dwelt at Modin. He lived in the city Modin, which is south, I believe, of Jerusalem. I believe Modin is south of Jerusalem. So he was, there was Levites set up in every city, in every little province that Israel had, because and then you had that one central place in the city of David in Jerusalem. So Mattathias, he had 5 sons, right? Joanan, Yochanan, called Cadiz, Simon called Thasai, Judas called Maccabeus, Eleazar called Avaran, and Jonathan called Apphus, right? So we know Avaran. So we know that Judas is the son that leads the charge ultimately, and that's where you get the title of the book being called the Maccabees, right? Because of Judas Maccabeus, who led the charge, right? And that name Maccabeus, it was actually a nickname. They called him Maccabeus, and that word Maccabeus means hammer or extinguisher. So when he came through, they called him Maccabeus because he was dropping that hammer. He was tough. He was that guy, right? The brother Eleazar Avaran is means piercer. So he was good with the sword. Yeah, it's in chapter 6, I believe he stabbed some elephants that was trying to attack, because they use all types of animals, right? So, all right. So let's go down to. I want to pick it up at verse 16. Verse 16. Verse 15, right? It says, in the meanwhile, the king's officers, such as compelled the people to revolt and came into the city of Modin to make them sacrifice, right? So now the king is sent out, like I said, he's been sending out people throughout the whole province to, to get them to start sacrificing and, join this one world order, right? And that now they're in the city in which which Mattathias and his sons reside. Verse 16, and when many of Israel came unto them, Mattathias also and his sons came together. Then the king's officers and said to Mattathias on this wise, thou art a ruler and an honorable and great man in this city, and strengthened with sons and brethren. Now therefore come thou first and fulfill the king's commandment, like as all the heathen have done, yea, and the men of Judah also, and such as remain at Jerusalem. So shalt thou and thy house be in the number of the king's friends, and thou and thy children shall be honored with silver, gold, and many rewards, right? So these officers have come to Mattathias specifically because they knew that he had power in the city. They knew they knew he was honored among the people. They knew that the people would listen to him. They knew that the people would listen to him. So they came to him first, right? And you see what they always offer, right? They always offer what? Gifts. You'll be cool with the king. You'll be the king's friend. You should be the one to do it. And you and your sons, all of y'all will be really famous. Just like how they do what? They set up those pastors like that, right? And then when pastors have children and the children want to follow the same footsteps, then what? They become little pastors and they're part of those little Mason cliques, right? And they're honored, and or like when people have kids and they're joining like the Omega Psi Phi fraternities, what else are they doing, right? Their children, if they go to college, then they join the fraternity, right? And it's easier for them to get in the fraternity, but what? You're brought into good standing with the people, because we know that they use those fraternities. Those fraternities are Masonic groups, and if you're in bed with the Masons, then you're in bed with the Illuminati and all the rest of the little secret societies that's on this earth right now, right? So we're gonna look at the response, right? We're gonna look at the response of our forefather, our relative, man. Verse 19. Then Mattathias answered and spake with a loud voice. Though all the nations are under the king's dominion, obey him and fall away everyone from his religion of their fathers and give consent to his commandments. Yet I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. Yahweh forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not hearken unto the king's words to go from our religion, either on the right or the left, right hand or the left, right? So right then he shut it down, right? We see Mattathias say, no, we're not doing that. You know what I'm saying? Me, none of my house, we're not doing that. We're not going away from the commandments, right? We're not going away from the laws of our forefathers. So we see him, stand up as the ruler, and not so much the ruler, but the great man in that city, like he should, right? He stood up and he said, "No, we're not gonna do that. We're not gonna do that." Now let's continue to look at what happens, right? 23, right? Verse 23. Now, when he had left speaking these words, there came one of the Jews in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar which was at Modin, according to the king's commandment. Right. So in the midst of Mattathias saying all of this, we still got a brother that comes up to sacrifice on the altar. Verse 24, which thing when Mattathias saw, he was inflamed with zeal and his reins trembled, neither could he forbear to show his anger according to judgment, wherefore he ran and slew him upon the altar. And also the king's commissioner, who compelled men to sacrifice, he killed at that time, and the altar he pulled down. So he killed the messenger, he killed the dude that was offering the sacrifice, and he killed the messenger, which is, and pulled down the altar, right? And you know, at that time, if you, to kill a messenger is a sign of disrespect. Well, first of all, they're officers. But also to kill, that's a sign of war. That if you want to, if you kill the messenger, you're gonna, just like in the movie 300, you kill the messenger, that is an act of war, right? Verse 26, thus dealt he zealously for the law of Yahweh, like as Phinehas did unto Zambri, the son of Salam. And Mattathias cried throughout the city with a loud voice, saying, whosoever is zealous of the law and maintaineth the covenant, let him follow me. Right? So the same thing we do now, right? We stand up for the Most High's law, statutes, and commandments, and say, whoever wants to follow us, right? Because we're following the commandments of the Most High, and we're going to, we're going towards the kingdom. We're trying to re-erect our kingdom, right? That's what we're doing, right? So right there, let me get Psalms 94 and 16, because that is, the feast of the dedication. That's why it's not a gift-giving holiday, and we would never use it as a gift-giving holiday, because we weren't giving gifts. We were giving butt whippings, and we were fighting back against the heathen. Psalm 94 and 16. Right. And it is very imperative that we understand that this is not a gift-giving holiday, and why it's not a gift-giving holiday. Because this is about liberation, right? I know some Israelite camps, they like, well, the Feast of Dedication, that's it's not in the Holy Seven, so we don't feel convicted enough to observe it. Well, on this wise, I say this, our forefathers did these courageous acts in the moments of adversity, right? In the midst of captivity, right? Because the Greeks were in rule at this time, right? And like I said, like most of the people that was even starting to be born there didn't even recognize it as the land that the Most High gave Israel, right? This is the book of Psalm chapter 94 and verse 16. I want to read this real quick. It says, who will rise up for me against the evildoers, or who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? Right? That's the question. The Most High is asking, who's going to stand up and do those things, right? And then we sit here, and during the Feast of Dedication, we relive this story in which Mattathias triumphed, right? And how he exhorted those who wanted to keep the commandments and not bow down to the king's one world religion, right? His one world order. Right. So then so when you read down, of course, they fled into the wilderness, right? They fled into the wilderness. Then let's jump down to about verse 45. Verse 45. And it reads, then Mattathias and his friends went round about and pulled down the altars, and what children soever they found within the coast of Israel, they uncircumcised, and those they circumcised valiantly. They pursued also after the proud men, and the work prospered in their hand. So they recovered the law out of the hand of the Gentiles and out of the hand of the kings. So neither suffered they the sinner to triumph. Right. So they went through their tearing down all those altars, everything they had done set up. Right. They went through there. If you wasn't circumcised, but you was one of those people that you wanted to do it, but you didn't want to be put to death. You wanted to be circumcised. They was going through that circumcising you, right? They was doing everything they could to reestablish the commandments of the Most High, right? Now, verse 49. Now, when the time drew near that Mattathias should die, he said unto his sons, now hath pride and rebuke gotten strength, and the time of destruction and the wrath of indignation. Right. So I want to look at the key of how he used that. It said, now pride and rebuke gotten strength, and the time of destruction and the wrath of indignation. Now, therefore, my sons, be zealous for the law, give your lives for the covenant of your fathers, the water. Call to remembrance what acts our fathers did in that time, so ye shall receive great honor and an everlasting name, right? So that's what we're supposed to do, right? Let's get a precept of that. Get Romans 15:4. All right, and it reads, the book of Romans, chapter 15, verse 4. I'm gonna let you get it real quick. And it reads, for whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope. Right? So just as Mattathias exhorted his sons, call to remembrance was acts your fathers did in their time. Right? So the things that were written aforetime, call to remembrance those acts. Right? Just as we do now, right? As we search the word, right? That's where our forefathers, our ancestors are, right? And we call to remembrance the acts they did, right? Which also the Feast of Dedication is also an act of our forefathers. It's an act, right? Because they did what? They stood firmly for the laws of the Most High. All right. And even now, what we don't fear the words of Esau or things of that nature no more, right? Because like verse 62, it reads, it says, fear not then the words of a sinful man, for his glory shall be dung and worms, right? So we understand that we're not worried about the things that they say, right? We're worried about the things that we're gonna do, right? And just keep these commandments, keep the commandments of the Most High. That's what we're gonna do. All right. So let's jump over to chapter 2. Jump over to chapter 2. I'm gonna start at no, I'm not gonna start all the way up chapter 2, and they said I started off at verse. No, that was chapter 2. I'm on chapter 3. I'm tripping. All right, so chapter 3. Let me just start at the top real quick, just to open it up. Yeah, I was already in chapter 2. All right, this is the book of Maccabees, chapter 3. Then his son Judas, called Maccabeus, rose up in his stead, and all his brethren helped him. And so did all they that held with his father, and they fought with cheerfulness the battle of Israel. So he gat his people great honor, and put on a breastplate as a giant, and girt his warlike harness about him, and he made battles, protecting the host with his sword. And his axe, he was like a lion, and like a lion's whelp, roaring for his prey. So man, Judas was a bad dude. He was a bad dude. Judas was a bad dude. Maccabeus was a bad dude, right? And it says what? He put on a breastplate like a giant, right? And that's also to let you know that the word giant, when you see that word giant, is not always talking about, a large, large physical person that's like, 50 feet tall, right? So we see that, that's why we make swords. We let the boys make swords and things of that nature during this time, so they get out of the habit, especially once they've seen Christmas and they're around all this Christmas stuff. We give them things like this to do, like make swords, and teach them about their forefathers and the acts that they did in this time, because just so that it's easier for them to transition if you have to, once they transitioned out of Christmas and stuff like that. All right, we'll jump down to verse 43. It reads, they said one to another, let us restore the decayed state of our people, and let us fight for our people and the sanctuary. right? So that's another thing that we do now, right? We look at one another even within this tribe and say, let's restore the decayed state of our people, right? That's the things that we say, right? So we look and we get this type of exaltation by doing what? Reading the things that the acts of our forefathers, and by honoring the acts of our forefathers. So as we read, as we observe the feast of dedication, we get to remember our forefathers doing this and the things, how they were motivated through the spirit, right? To fight for the Most High, to stand up for the Most High, right? And we get to read this history and know that, dang, it's the same. They doing these same tricks now. Like it's the same trick, right? When we go down to verse, let's go down to verse 40. I'm gonna go down to verse 46. It says, "Wherefore the Israelites assembled themselves together and came to Mizpah over against Jerusalem, for in Mizpah was the place where they prayed aforetime in Israel. Then they fasted that day and put on sackcloth and cast ashes upon their head and rent their clothes, and laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen sought to paint the likeness of their images." Right? They've been doing this, right? That's something that they've been doing. The whitewashing, this was their first attempt at whitewashing, right? Because they had to recover this book out of the hands of the heathen. And once they did, they were doing what? They were putting their images in there. The same tricks that they do today, right? That's how we know that's how we know who these people are, right? Because just like the law, the curses were put on us to recognize who are the people suffering from the curses and who the people are in the latter day. The same way when we look at our forefathers and look at the people that came up against them and the tricks that they did, right? The same one trick pony, right? The truth exposes all things, right? So we have to be ready to do what? Restore the decayed state of our people. This is a real fight that we're in. The Feast of Dedication, the dedicating of the altar, right? That's something they had to fight to do, right? We weren't given anything. We had to take back everything, right? So we have to keep in mind that this is a real fight that we're in. Within this tribe, we're in a fighting back to restore the decayed state of our people, right? As Israelites, we're fighting to restore the decayed state of our people, right? That's why, like, you have to be sound in your mind, just like the chief was bringing out, about the mind. You have to have in your mind, this is a war, this is a real fight. But this isn't, we're not out here as our forefathers with the swords, right? We're not out there now like that, but we are in a war, right? Let me get a couple precepts on that. Let me get 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4. 2 Corinthians 10 and 4. Right here. And it reads, right? "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal," right? "But mighty through Yahweh to the pulling down of strongholds," right? So the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. Well, what are our weapons, right? Let's get Ecclesiastes chapter 10. So we bring it all the way home. Because the weapons of our warfare is not carnal, right? Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 18. And it reads, "Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good." Right? So that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal because we are using wisdom as our weapon. The commandments of the Most High, right? The commandments, that's the wisdom. So we know if we are keeping the commandments of the Most High is going to fight for us, right? So the wisdom of our warfare is not carnal, right? But like I said, mighty through Yahweh to the pulling down of the strongholds, right? And it goes back to what Chief was saying about the mind. And you have to know that this is a fight that we're in, just as our forefathers were in during this time, right? In Maccabees chapter 3, let's go down to verse 56. It says, I'm gonna start at about 53, right? It says, how shall we then be able to stand up against them except our power be our help, right? So as they was fasting and they were sending up prayers and praising the Most High, right? This is what he said, right? How should we be able to stand against them except our God be our help? We know that Yahweh is our help. That's something that we have to also know in our mind and keep our mind strong and sound about, knowing that Yahweh is our help from start to finish, right? We should never doubt the Most High or that help, even though we're in the fight. That's why you have to be in the fight. To be fighting, you have to be in the fight, right? But also while you're in the fight, you have to believe that the Most High's already fought for you and this fight is already won. I just have to go through the motions. The fight is already won. And these things, that's why we look at our forefathers and exhort ourselves in this time the same way, right? Verse 54, then they sounded with trumpets and cried with a loud voice. And after this, Judah ordained captains over the people, even captains over thousands and over hundreds and over fifties and over tens. But as for such as were building houses or had betrothed wives or were planting vineyards or were fearful, those he commanded that they should return every man to his own house according to the law, right? And we had to do that according to the commandment, right? What law is that? Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 20. You go to Deuteronomy chapter 20, because Judas told him, like, look, man, if you're afraid, don't come out here. If you just got a house, started planting, right? According to all these things, according to the law, right? If you started planting a vineyard, go ahead and go home, take care of that vineyard. If you just got you a wife, just got married, go home, take care of that wife, right? And those things were done according to the law, right? Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 20. I'm gonna start at verse 3. And it reads, and shall say unto them, hear, O Israel, ye approach this day unto battle against your enemies. Let not your hearts faint, fear not, and do not tremble, neither be ye terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is he that goeth with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. And the officers shall speak unto the people, saying, what man is there that hath built a new house and have not dedicated it? Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man dedicate it. And what man is he that have planted a vineyard and have not yet eaten of it? Let him also go and return to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man eat of it. And what man is there that have betrothed a wife and have not taken her? Let him go and return unto his house, lest he die in the battle and another man take her. And the officer shall speak further to the people and say, what man is there that is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return unto his house, lest his brother's heart faint as well as his heart. Right? So, even in that time, right, that was the commandment. Right. And we also, even in rereading these stories of our forefathers, it takes us back to the laws of the Most High. Right. And that's the same way we have to keep in our mind and strengthen our minds now, because what? You have to have your mind prepared to go through the fight. But just like we read in the law, you got to know that it's the Most High who is with you and fighting for you against the enemy. You have to have your mind sound on that. Right? You have to have your mind sound. Right, let me slide on down here to in chapter 4, right? Chapter 4 and verse 13, right? And it reads, wherefore when they went out of the camp to battle, but they that were with Judas sounded their trumpets right? So wherefore they went out to camp to battle, but they that were with Judas sounded their trumpets, right? Now, that's another key a key point in the law as well, that you have to know the laws of the Most High and be familiar with these things, because it's a reason why he blew that trumpet, right? And that's something that we have to understand too in observing these holy days and why we're to do the things that we're to do, right? Let's go to Numbers chapter 9. Chapter 10. Numbers chapter 10. Let's go to Numbers chapter 10. Chapter 10 and verse 9. Right, because it's a reason, right? When you look above in this chapter in Maccabees, one of the I think it was a captain or something of one of Antiochus' armies had 5,000 footmen and 5,000 horsemen, right? And that's what they were going out there to battle against. They were going to go out there and try to put Judah to death. They were going to go out there and try to kill him, right? But and it wasn't many. It wasn't a whole lot of them. You know what I'm saying? It was a good bit of them. But when you see 5,000 men on foot and 5,000 men on horses, that can be a bit of a shock to the mind, right? So Judas, like I said, Judas, they sounded with their trumpets, and this is why they sounded with their trumpets. Um, Numbers chapter 9, 10, verse 9, and it reads, "If ye go to war in your land against the enemy that oppresseth you, then ye shall blow an alarm with the trumpets, and ye shall be remembered before the Lord your God, and ye shall be saved from your enemies." Right? So keep in mind, that's also why we have the memorial blowing of the trumpets. That's also why we have the memorial blowing of the trumpets, right? Because when we blow those trumpets, we're remembered before our God, right? That's the same reason Judas, before they went into battle, they did what? They had to sound with they sounded with their trumpets. So because they were in their land and the Most High was about to what? They were in their land and they were being oppressed. So the Most High was going to come and save them at that time. Right. Let's go down a couple more key points. Right. So let's go down to verse 40. No, let's go up, right? Verse 36. Verse 36 in chapter 4. And it reads, "Then said Judas and his brethren, Behold, our enemies are discomfited. Let us go up to cleanse and dedicate the sanctuary." Dedicate the sanctuary. Upon all this, the host assembled themselves together and went up into the Mount Zion. And when they saw the sanctuary, when they saw the sanctuary desolate, and the altar profaned, and the gates burned up, and shrubs growing in the courts as in the forest, or one of the mountains, yea, the priest's chambers pulled down, they rent their clothes and made great lamentation and cast ashes upon their head. Right. So when they got there, man, it had done been so desolate, man. You just had stuff growing wild. It just looked unkept. Right. You know what I'm saying? The priestly things just pulled down, just everything just in disarray. Right. And like I said, right, it did blow them, right? They rent their clothes and made, they cried. They cried. Right. Verse 40. And fell down upon the ground upon their faces and blew an alarm with the trumpets and cried toward the heaven. Right. You know what I'm saying? And then they still blowing trumpets, they upset, right? They crying to the Most High. Then Judas appointed certain men to fight against those that were in fortress until he had cleansed the sanctuary, right? And that was also prophesied in the book of Daniel, right? Let's get Daniel chapter 8 and verse 14. Daniel 8 and 14. And it reads, "And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." Right. And this was that point from that time in Daniel, when Daniel received that this prophecy, It said it would be 2,300 days. Then the sanctuary will be cleansed. And that was at this point here when they came back to taking down those altars and the dedication. Because in Daniel 8, like we read up earlier in the prophecy, it prophesied of Alexander the Great, his four generals, and Antiochus Epiphanes. And then at this point, once they came back, that's when they were going to begin to cleanse the sanctuary, right? So
2,300.
2,300 days, 2,300 days, right? Right. So verse 42, it says, so he chose priests of blameless conversation, such as had pleasure in the law, who cleanse the sanctuary and bear out of the defiled stones into an unclean place. And when they consulted what to do with the altar of burnt offerings, which was profane, they thought it best to pull it down, lest it should be a reproach to them, because the heathen had defiled it. Wherefore they pulled it down and laid up the stones in the mountain of the temple in a convenient place until they should come to a prophet to show what should be done with them. Then they took whole stones according to the law and built a new altar according to the former, and made up the sanctuary and the things that were within the temple and hallowed the courts. They made also new holy vessels, and into the temple they brought the candlestick and the altar of burnt offerings and of incense and the table. And upon the altar they burned incense, and the lamps that they were upon the candlestick they lighted, that they might give light in the temple. Furthermore, they set the loaves upon the table and spread out the veils and finished all the works which had begun to make. Right. So as you know, after they done, bewailed and blew the trumpets, they began to what rededicate the whole temple, to cleanse it, right? To clean it up, new vessels, like I said, right? They hallowed the courts, cleaned it up, right? They made a new altar, and then that's when you see the candlestick, right? The menorah. They use the menorah to give light in the temple. Right, so that's why we see the menorah during the time of the feast of dedication, right? The lighting of the menorah, right? Verse 52. Now on the 25th day of the ninth month, which is called Caslah, in the 148th year, they rose up betimes in the morning and offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings which they had made. Look at what time and what day the heathen had profaned it, even in that even in that was it dedicated with songs and with cisterns and with harps and cymbals. Then all the people fell upon their faces, worshiping and praising Yahweh of heaven, who had given them good success. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days and offered burnt offerings with gladness, and sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. They decked also the forefront of the temple with crowns of gold and with shields, and the gates and the chambers they renewed, and hanged the doors upon them. Thus, thus was there very great gladness among the people, for that the reproach of the heathen was put away. Moreover, Judas and his brethren, with the whole congregation of Israel, ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year by the space of 8 days from the 25th day of the month Caslah with mirth and gladness. Right. So that's when we see the birth of the feast of the dedication. Right. They got together and said, we're gonna keep this dedication, the space of 8 days, right? And they kept the space of 8. It's a reason why he even, chose the space of 8 days, right? Let me get I think it's in Second Maccabees. Let's look at Second Maccabees real quick. Um, um, okay, right. Second Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 18 says, therefore, whereas we are now purposed to keep the purification of the temple upon the 25th day of the month, Caslau, we thought it necessary to certify you thereof, that ye also might keep it, as the feast of the tabernacles and of the fire which was given us when Nehemiah offered sacrifice at the that he had builded the temple and the altar. Right. So this right here in the second Maccabees was when they wrote like a letter or something to the Jews that were the Israelites that were in Egypt and stuff like that, right? To keep this same ordinance, right? Just as we keep this ordinance in the tribe, we would go out and inform other Israelite groups or tribes who have the same belief to keep this same custom, right? Because it makes reference to Nehemiah once he came and had rebuilt the temple and the altar, right? But the first person to actually build the temple and to build the altar and dedicate it was actually Solomon. Solomon was the first to do it. And then once it got destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, then Nehemiah did it, right? Had it built. But I want to recount the time that Solomon did it, right? Because the reason you have to know that Maccabeus, that he had to have knowledge of this account, right? Because Solomon dedicated the altar when he built the temple for the Most High. Let's go to Second Chronicles chapter 2. Second Chronicles. Okay. So we go to Second Chronicles chapter 2. And verse 4. And it reads, behold, I build an house to the name of the Lord my power, to dedicate it to him, and to burn before him sweet incense, and for the continual showbread, and for the burnt offerings morning and evening, on the Sabbaths, and on the new moon, and on the solemn feast of the Lord our power. This is an ordinance for Israel forever. So this is when we see Solomon, as he built the temple, and then he dedicated it, right? He did this dedication during the time of the Feast of Tabernacles. That's why you see Judas worded that way, right? To keep the feast as the Feast of Tabernacles. Because when Solomon did it, which we're going to read, he did it during the Feast of Tabernacles, right? So let's slide down in the chapter and let's see where was that. Where's that? Okay. All right. When you jump over to chapter 5, Second Chronicles chapter 5, we'll start at verse 1, right? And it reads, thus all the work that Solomon made for the house of the Lord was finished. And Solomon brought in all the things that David his father had dedicated, and the silver and the gold, and all the instruments put he among the treasures of the house of Yahweh. Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, and the chief chief of the fathers of the children of Israel, unto Jerusalem, to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which is in Zion. Wherefore all the men assembled themselves unto the king in the feast, which was in the 7th month. Right. Let's see. Let's go down to right. And that's the feast. That's the feast that's within the 7th month is the feast of the tabernacles. Right. We'll read down. Let's see. Right. Yeah, that's the part. Okay. Yeah. That's the part I wanted to bring out. So that's why they keep it. That's why we keep it the space of 8 days as the Feast of Tabernacles, because it was done in the month, the feast of the 7th month, and that's the feast of the 7th month that they're talking about, right? Those 3 feasts, that's one of the 3 feasts that we have to appear before the Most High, right? The Feast of Passover, the Feast of Pentecost, and then the Feast of Tabernacles. So that's why, and Judas had, like I said, he had to have known that. So, Mattathias had passed down all of that history to Judas Maccabeus, and that's why they kept it the space of 8 days as what? As the Feast of Tabernacles, right? And that is all I have on that. That is all the history I got on the Feast of Tabernacles. Right, so I'm gonna give all praise. I'm at the Feast of Dedication. I'm sorry, the Feast of the Dedication.
We jumped back.